It was August of 1967, and we were leaving Davidson. We were packing and getting everything ready. The interesting thing was the main pieces of furniture had to go into storage, but we could take small tables and table lamps and pictures and that kind of thing. And the reason was the quarters in Germany were already equipped with the main primary pieces of furniture, large pieces, sofas, chairs, and so forth, so that they didn't have the expense of shipping those back and forth. And then we had our clothes also that would go with us to Germany. We went down to Columbus for a while with Ms. Heiss, and then we came back up to Richmond. And I remember that there at Richmond, Vanessa celebrated her second birthday, and I believe there's some pictures on the films of that. And then after that, we left and went to McGuire Air Force Base, and we were to fly over to Germany. And I remember, I think Uncle Bob Ware and Mom took us up there. And I don't remember how, I got in my car to the port, and it was already headed to Germany. I remember when we got in the air and we were flying, Vanessa said to me, "When are we going to fly?" And I said, "Vanessa, we already are flying. Look out the window." And I said, "Those are the clouds that we're looking down on top of instead of from underneath like you usually do." And she was very surprised and kept looking out at the window. We landed in Frankfurt, and I saw an officer, a lieutenant, walking around, looking up and down, and he had the 8th Infantry Division and the airborne patch on. And I thought, I'll just wait a minute and see what's going on. And then I finally asked him if he was in the 8th Infantry Division. I said, "That's where I was going." He said, "Yes, I'm here to pick you up and take you to Mainz." And I said, "Oh, wonderful." So we had a car, lieutenant, to take us to our place. We went to the house. There were bed sheets there. The house was all ready. There was some food in the kitchen, not much, but a little bit. And so we were really set. And I remember I went in that afternoon and began to learn about the Airborne Brigade, and Vanessa and Emily stayed at the house and rested. The Airborne Brigade of the 8th Division consisted of 2 battalions of the 509th, and then we had all of the support troops that were jump qualified. And by the way, everybody here was not only mechanized infantry, in other words, they had the armored personnel carriers and so forth to operate in that kind of warfare, but we also had the ability to jump into an area. We had the artillery that was able to jump, qualified. We had the military police, the engineers, an element of all of those, so that the unit could go anywhere and it would have all of the operational and support elements that we needed. We often trained at major training areas throughout Germany, so the units were there often traveling and training through Grafenwehr and Hohenfels, the major training areas there. I remember that early on, right when I first got there, we had a command post exercise, what's called a CPX. And our job, our battalion, our brigade, was on the Fulda Gap. And that was seen as one of the major routes that the Russians would come into Europe if they invaded. And things went really well, and the brigade commander was happy with the performance. Everything had gone well. He departed and left me in charge. There had been a lot of accidents, vehicle accidents. And so they had made a rule that when a vehicle was traveling, then it should have an officer, a senior NCO, in there to be sure that the driver didn't wreck the vehicle. Well, that night, Carl had gone, and I was there, and there was something I was needing. It was down the hill, maybe a mile away, and I sent the driver down by himself, and darn if he didn't turn the Jeep over. And it injured him. He was taken to the hospital, and they came back and told me what had happened. And I said, "Well, where is he?" And I spent much of the night trying to find him in the hospital and see what his condition was, and then finally got back into the headquarters. So the next day, we were to move back to the home area. And I remember I was very tired because the last night had been disappointing because we'd done so well, and then I'd had that accident occur just at the time we were closing out. Oh, when I got back to Mainz, the brigade commander was very upset at me for having had that accident. And I remember he had been so proud of the way the brigade had performed. So things didn't turn out for me at the beginning as I would like to have done that. I remember that I conducted the company test and umpired the company test for all of the companies within the brigade. And there was a forest area west of Wiesbaden, Germany, just across the river from Mainz. And that's why we conducted these tests. And I spent a lot of time in that area. They would be alerted, moved to an assembly area. But this was armored personnel carrier test, by the way. It wasn't an airborne test and a mechanized infantry test. So we would go conduct those tests. And they were very tiring because they had so many of them to do. Our drop zone was about 20 miles south of Mainz, I guess, in an open farm field, and we had a permission to use that field. And I had jumped in there several times before in other activities. And one day, we had a parachute platoon headed by a senior warrant officer. And this was about 20 guys who packed all the parachutes, took care of the parachutes, and they were just experts. They had jumped many, many times. And to make sure they were always careful in the way they packed the parachute, every so often we would pull a parachute at random from the pile of chutes they had packed, and they would go and jump that chute, not knowing who had packed it, what condition it was in, and so forth. So that was the way we made sure that they always were careful about the way they packed the chute, because they might be the guy that was going to jump it. One day, the senior NCO, senior warrant officer there, called me and said, "Major, we've got a C-141. This was the first jet that we had in the services, and coming into Germany. And tomorrow morning, we're going to have it. This is the first time it'd come. It'd been over to England, and it came over to us. And we're going to have a chance to jump it. And some of us on the parachute platoon are going to go jump it. Would you like to join us?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, that would be great. I'd love to try that." So that night when I got home, I thought about it again. Let's see, I'm going to jump a jet? That thing is brand new to the services. And I said, what in the world have I volunteered for here? And these guys were well-trained and knew all about it. But anyway, we went out the next day. We flew a route into the drop zone, and the plane just was as stable as it could be. And they opened the doors, and we had a speaker system where the jump master could give commands to us. And when you opened the door, a little platform your feet stepped out on, there was a wind deflector that was to the side that kept too much wind from hitting you right there. It had holes in it, so some of the wind came through. But it was really a superb jump, a great jump. I jumped in, and I was so impressed by that. I remember at the end of that, I got from the Air Force a tie clasp that had a carving of the C-141 on it, and they had given that to people who had been the first to jump a C-141. A number of people had jumped it back in the States before we ever got to, but they still gave us those, and I've still got mine. Our brigade had responsibility to conduct airborne operations anywhere around the Mediterranean, and we did operations in Spain, in Italy, Turkey, Greece, and we also had responsibility for North Africa. Just before Christmas of '67, the general, I guess he was the assistant division commander, went down, and myself and one of our officers went down to Tripoli. And there we were planning and making sure that we knew how the operation would proceed if we jumped in to protect Wheelus Air Force Base. Wheelus was a large air base in Africa, and we had a treaty that said we could use it until 1970. Well, this was 67, almost going into 68, and we're going into plan on how to jump in if Gaddafi got to causing problems down there if we needed to. And I was sort of concerned. I remember I raised the issue to the general. We only got 2 years. Is it worth us jumping in and the casualties we'll have and so forth if he acts up? And, of course, you have to be ready to do that because otherwise they would push you around quite a bit. I remember that Christmas, Emily wrote a letter to her mom, and she said, "Our family is in 4 continents tonight. My brother, Raymond, is in Vietnam and Asia. You are in the United States, North America. I'm in Germany and Europe, and Bob is in Africa. So we were really spread out for this Christmas." Shortly after we had done our work there, our aircraft that brought us down had mechanical problems. And so they couldn't get us back, and it was just a couple of days before Christmas. Well, somehow they got the general out, but then the lieutenant and I were left there. And on Christmas Eve, finally, we got an airplane that took us back up to Germany. So we got there just in time to celebrate Christmas. While I was there, I went to jump master school. By the way, we had, and I failed to include this, we had a small jump school that was located with us there to do refresher training, jump master training, and other kinds of training. We had a captain who took care of that class and had some NCOs who conducted, and we had an area near the Wiesbaden area air base, and they conducted the training. So I took the jump master class. And I remember we had 4 or 5 jumps. Several of them were at night, where you were performing as jump master, and then after that, you would be a jumper for another guy to act as jump master. Well, when I jumped out, I saw there was car lights on the drop zone. And I wonder, what in the world are these car lights here? We shouldn't have that. When I got down, I learned that the chaplain, who was our next door neighbor, had brought Emily and Vanessa out to watch the jump that night. He didn't know quite where he was going, and he got on the drop zone with his car coming down. I remember people were yelling, "Turn out the lights, turn out the lights." And I wondered, who in the world would that be that had come out to this drop zone and had lights on, didn't know any better than that. I wanted to talk a minute about the socials. We had a lot of socials in there. And our division commander was a General Mabry. He was a Medal of Honor winner, and he would come to many of these socials. And when he would come, the first time we had to dress uniforms on, and he had a Medal of Honor hanging around, a 2-star general. And he came over and he asked Emily for a dance. And Emily danced with him. When she came back, I said, "Now, aren't you something, dancing with a 2-star Medal of Honor winner?" Well, another event came, and he came again and asked her to dance with him. And so she did. And whenever he was there, whenever we'd had these formals, he would always ask her for a dance. And she was very proud of it. While in Germany on that opportunity, we also had a quick leave. I went over to France, through Switzerland, and into northern Italy. We didn't go down into Italy. We just in the northern part of Italy. But I remember when we came back, one of the sort of memorable times was we stopped at San Moritz. And we stayed there and wandered the town, and we took the cars up to the tops of the mountains. Vanessa went up, and you'll see some pictures in our scrapbooks or somewhere of us on top of the mountains at San Moritz. One night we went for supper at the Kulm Hotel, Kulm, very plush, and obviously very rich people in there. We had Vanessa with us, and it was sort of unusual to have a little girl, 2 years old, 3 years old, in there. But anyway, it was fine. We stayed next door at a less expensive hotel called the Langard.